What if everything you've been told about reality, your life, your faith, your very purpose, was built on a lie? Not just any lie, but the most ancient deception in human history. For centuries, people have prayed to gods they believed were benevolent, trusted institutions they thought were sacred, and lived inside a world they assumed was real. But what if this reality was nothing more than a prison designed not to free your soul, but to keep it bound? This is where the unsettling truth emerges. The Demiurge and YALDABAOTH, the dark architects of the false reality. The Gnostics dared to say what few would even whisper, that the god worshipped by millions was not the true source, but an impostor. A lion-serpent creature, YALDABAOTH, false god, who created the world not as a gift, but as a cage. They called him the Demiurge, explained, the architect of the false creation myth, the father of the archons who still whisper in humanity's ears. It sounds outrageous, doesn't it? But once you look closely, you begin to see the cracks. Wars justified in the name of God, suffering treated as divine punishment, endless cycles of despair feeding unseen powers. And here's the paradox. The prison is vast, but its walls are invisible. Most people never even realize they are chained. Yet there is a spark inside you, a fragment of the true source that remembers the higher light. The moment you start to question, the illusion begins to break. And if you stay with me in this journey, you'll uncover the shocking truth behind the Demiurge and YALDABAOTH, and why this forbidden knowledge might be the key to freeing your soul from the false reality that has ruled humanity for millennia. What if everything you've ever believed about reality was a carefully woven illusion? Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that the streets, the people, even the stars above were not the true creation of a benevolent source, but a construct engineered by false reality creators. This is the heart of the Demiurge explained, a concept from Gnostic forbidden knowledge that shatters the comfort of everyday assumptions. The unsettling part is not that this might be myth, but the traces of this idea are found across cultures, hidden in myths, scriptures, and even in the subconscious of humanity itself. A world that feels real may actually be nothing more than a prison of the soul. Throughout the ages, the whispers of Gnosticism, Demiurge teachings have lingered in forgotten texts, hinting at a sinister architect behind the cosmos. They speak of YALDABAOTH Gnostic myth, a false god who claimed dominion over creation, a cosmic impostor dressed in divinity. When you look at the suffering of the world, wars, corruption, endless cycles of ignorance, doesn't it feel suspiciously deliberate, as though engineered by a force that thrives on keeping humanity asleep? Gnostic cosmology explained suggests it isn't random chaos, but the result of a false creation myth, a shadow copy of the true order. Once you see this possibility, you can't unsee it. Think about how people cling to what they can touch, their homes, their money, their routines. But if matter itself is the lie, then all of this might be the gilded bars of a cage. It reminds me of standing in a grand cathedral, marveling at its stained glass and beauty, only to realize later that its design was meant to trap the gaze upward, away from questioning. The world around us may be no different. Archons and the Demiurge operate in silence, weaving a tapestry of distractions so convincing that most never look beyond it. And when someone dares to question, they are branded as heretics, dreamers, or worse. You might think, but if this is true, why would anyone hide it? That's the chilling part. The lie sustains itself because it benefits the one who built it. YALDABAOTH false god thrives on worship, obedience, and blind faith. Every time humanity kneels before fear, authority, or false hope, the architects of this false reality tighten their grip. Imagine a farmer who builds a pen for his cattle, not out of malice, but out of the desire for control and harvest. The pen is comfortable enough, but its purpose is not freedom. In the same way, the prison of the soul is disguised as the playground of life. History itself gives us breadcrumbs, if only we're willing to follow them. Ancient myths speak of creators who were not benevolent but jealous, vengeful, demanding sacrifices of blood and loyalty. Doesn't that sound eerily familiar to stories we still accept today without question? From the deserts of Mesopotamia to the temples of Egypt, the pattern repeats. Gods who claim they alone are supreme, gods who punish rebellion with eternal torment. Could these be echoes of YALDABAOTH Gnostic myth, masked over time as the divine lawgiver? It's not about rejecting spirituality, but about questioning the source of that authority. Let's put it into practical terms. Have you ever felt like life itself runs on a script, pushing you into roles you never chose? Go to school, get a job, pay taxes, obey the laws, die quietly. It feels safe because everyone else is doing it. Yet deep inside, there's a nagging suspicion that the system wasn't built for your freedom. That nagging is the same whisper the Gnostics spoke of, the recognition that the Demiurge explained is not some distant mythology, but an active structure shaping human existence. If you've ever felt that your soul doesn't quite belong here, you already sense the false reality creators at work. And here lies the great enigma. If what we call reality is already compromised, then where do we look for the truth? That question alone pulls us into the next chapter of this mystery. For to understand the architects of illusion, one must first uncover their origins, where they came from, and why they forged the chains that still bind humanity. And that story begins not with kings or thrones, but with a fall, an ancient wound in the heart of wisdom itself. Sophia, the aeon of wisdom, is often described as pure radiance, a spark from the ineffable source. Yet even wisdom can stumble when it acts outside divine harmony. According to Gnostic cosmology explained, Sophia's desire to create independently birthed something unexpected, a flawed child outside the fullness of the pleroma. This being, blind and ignorant, would later become known as the Demiurge. Unlike the aeons who reflected balance and truth, this offspring embodied imbalance. Imagine a musician who tries to play without hearing the orchestra. What emerges is noise, not harmony. And from that noise, the first cracks in the cosmos appeared. The Demiurge, explained through Gnostic texts, is not a monster in the typical sense, but a being born of error. Sophia's fall was not evil, but a tragic misstep that allowed imperfection into existence. This is where the roots of the false creation myth take hold. YALDABAOTH Gnostic myth portrays him as a being blind to the higher realms, yet drunk with the illusion of power. He did not know the source, but in his ignorance he proclaimed himself the only God. Isn't it chilling to think that our very world may have been shaped by the arrogance of a child who mistook his shadow for the sun? Picture this, a child building a sandcastle on the beach, convinced it is the entire kingdom of the world. That child is the Demiurge. He believes his creation is absolute, yet the waves of the true source always loom nearby, ready to wash it away. Gnosticism, Demiurge teachings remind us that our material existence may be nothing more than that sandcastle, fragile and temporary. YALDABAOTH, false god, demanded worship not because he was worthy, but because he feared being exposed. And so he built a reality where ignorance itself became a weapon to keep souls blind. Sophia's fall also reveals something deeply human. Haven't we all made choices outside of wisdom, believing we were strong enough to control the outcome, only to birth chaos instead? In this sense, the myth is not distant, it is mirrored in our daily lives. We too are capable of creating prisons when we act without awareness. This prison of the soul is not just cosmic, it's personal. The Gnostics understood that myths like this were maps of inner reality as much as outer. To study the birth of the Demiurge is to study our own moments of blindness, arrogance, and misplaced power. The Archons and the Demiurge did not appear suddenly. They emerged as extensions of this flawed creation. The offspring of Sophia's imbalance echoed through the lower realms, giving rise to rulers who would enforce the illusion. Just as flawed systems in society spread when left unchecked, this flawed being multiplied his error into layers of deception. Imagine a lie told once. It may seem small, but tell it 1,000 times, build laws around it, and soon it becomes the very structure of people's lives. That is the scale of the Demiurge's creation, a false reality that felt unshakably real. And yet, within this tragedy lies a hidden seed of redemption. Sophia, though fallen, never abandoned her creation. Gnostic forbidden knowledge suggests she wove a secret plan into the fabric of reality, sparks of divine light planted inside human souls. These sparks are the silent protest against the Demiurge explained, a reminder that no matter how thick the illusion, it can never completely erase the truth. If you've ever felt that strange pull towards something higher, something beyond what this world offers, you've brushed against that hidden spark. It is Sophia's whisper in the darkness. But here's the paradox. If the Demiurge was born of Sophia, then he carries a fragment of her light, even as he denies it. This makes him not just a tyrant, but a tragic figure, a being desperate to be more than he is. And in that desperation, he builds prisons rather than temples, chains rather than paths. The story doesn't end here. For once the Demiurge takes shape, he reveals his mask, a lion-serpent face filled with arrogance and hunger. And through that mask, the lie of reality deepens, dragging humanity into even darker illusions. YALDABAOTH is not introduced in Gnostic cosmology, explained as a gentle creator, but as a frightening vision, a lion-headed serpent that embodies both arrogance and primal chaos. The lion's head represents domination, roaring authority, and the hunger for power. The serpent's body reflects cunning, deception, and the endless coil of time that imprisons the soul. Together, this monstrous image serves as the mask of the Demiurge explained, the disguise of the false god who forged a counterfeit creation. Myths describe him as proclaiming, "I am God and there is no other," but in truth, he was blind to the source above him. Isn't it haunting that so many still bow to a voice born of ignorance? Think of the lion for a moment. In nature, it roars not only to assert dominance, but to create fear. Fear becomes the first tool of control. YALDABAOTH, false god, mirrors this instinct, demanding obedience through terror. But unlike the natural lion, his roar echoes through religions, laws, and traditions that tell humanity they are small, guilty, and dependent. The serpent, meanwhile, adds subtlety to this force, whispering lies, offering illusions, weaving stories that keep the mind chained. Archons and the Demiurge operate under this mask, and the world becomes a stage where fear and deception are the leading actors. When you encounter this myth, it doesn't feel like ancient fantasy. It feels like a mirror of life itself. How often do people submit to systems that roar with authority while slipping lies into their ears? Governments, corporations, and even spiritual leaders often wear the lion-serpent mask. They demand loyalty, impose punishment, and promise salvation, all while keeping the soul blind. YALDABAOTH Gnostic myth isn't just about a creature in the sky. It's about the false reality creators who still shape the collective human story. And when we fail to see the mask, we fall deeper into the prison of the soul. There's also a psychological layer here. Every human being carries inner lions and serpents, ego and deceit. The mask of YALDABAOTH is not only cosmic, but personal. Whenever someone believes they are the only voice of truth, shutting themselves off from higher wisdom, they echo the arrogance of the Demiurge explained. Whenever someone manipulates others to maintain control, they wear the serpent's skin. The Gnostics didn't just describe gods and monsters, they described patterns of behavior that trap us. And by recognizing these patterns within, we begin to see how they rule the world without. Artists across centuries have struggled to depict this lion-serpent being, often with grotesque features meant to unsettle. But the true horror is not in his appearance, it's in his demand for worship. Imagine kneeling before a ruler who knows nothing of truth, yet punishes any who dare to question. That is the essence of the false creation myth. YALDABAOTH, false god, builds temples to himself, filling them with laws, rituals, and sacrifices designed to reinforce his dominion. And the tragedy, millions give devotion without realizing they are feeding the very chains that bind them. Yet, there is an odd vulnerability in this terrifying mask. Why would a true god need to demand recognition? Why would an all-powerful being roar for worship? The very act reveals insecurity. YALDABAOTH, blind and arrogant, knows deep down that he is not the source. The mask of lion and serpent is an act of compensation, a costume hiding his ignorance, and this opens a path of questioning. If the architect of our world is so desperate for validation, then perhaps the prison of the soul is weaker than it appears. Perhaps every act of awareness chips away at the illusion, but masks are not easily removed. Once YALDABAOTH established his false throne, he expanded his reach through the architecture of matter itself. He needed more than fear and lies. He needed a world built as a cage. And so the lion serpent did not stop at words. He forged a cosmos, brick by brick, as a counterfeit reflection of the divine. To truly grasp his influence, we must now step into the vast construction he laid out, the false cosmos where matter itself becomes a chain, and time, the jailer of all souls. The Demiurge did not simply roar commands. He built walls. According to Gnostic cosmology explained, the material universe itself was forged as a counterfeit reflection of divine order, a false creation myth designed to imprison the soul. Matter became the bricks of this invisible prison, while time itself became the chain that locked every being into cycles of birth and death. To live in such a cosmos is to feel freedom while unknowingly carrying shackles. Isn't it strange how life often feels like a wheel spinning endlessly, yet going nowhere? That sensation may not be coincidence. It may be the design of the false reality creators. Imagine standing inside a beautiful palace where every room is dazzling with gold, but every door leads back to the same corridor. That's the architecture of the Demiurge explained, a world filled with apparent choices that circle back into limitation. YALDABAOTH, false god, built matter as both gift and curse, offering pleasures to distract from the prison of the soul. The archons act as wardens, ensuring no one dares question why the palace has no exit, and humanity, marveling at the beauty, rarely notices the trick. After all, how can a prison be questioned if its walls look like paradise? Modern life reflects this architecture with uncanny precision. People chase wealth, relationships, and success, believing these pursuits will lead to liberation. Yet each achievement fades, leaving hunger for the next. Isn't that eerily similar to a serpent devouring its tail? The cycle never ends because the cage was built to recycle desire. Gnosticism, Demiurge myths remind us that this is not accidental, it is a design. Matter is a trap because it convinces the soul that fulfillment lies outside, when in truth, fulfillment is the spark hidden within. The more we chase the external, the tighter the cage closes. Even religions often mirror this architecture. Temples, laws, and rituals that claim to free humanity often reinforce obedience to the very false god that created the cage. Think of doctrines that promise salvation only after death, under strict obedience, as though freedom must forever be deferred. Doesn't that sound like the whispers of YALDABAOTH Gnostic myth, ensuring that no one realizes freedom is already theirs? This inversion turns spirituality into another wall in the maze. It is no surprise that Gnostics called the Demiurge the architect of deception, a builder of cages disguised as kingdoms. But the architecture is not just physical or religious, it's psychological. Every fear, every doubt, every limiting belief acts as another bar in the prison of the soul. When someone says, "That's just the way things are," they unknowingly echo the voice of the false reality creators, and yet cracks appear in the walls whenever awareness rises. Think of those moments when you suddenly realize you've been living on autopilot. That flash of clarity is like seeing the blueprints of the cage. The Gnostics believed such moments were glimpses of the divine spark, reminders that the prison was never absolute. Science itself offers metaphors for this ancient teaching. Physicists speak of reality as energy, vibrating at specific frequencies. What if matter is nothing more than dense vibration, frozen light shaped into walls? Archons and the Demiurge may be the jailers of this vibrational prison, keeping the soul locked in a limited spectrum. It's almost like being stuck in a single channel of an infinite radio, unable to turn the dial. Doesn't that sound like a cosmic trap hidden in plain sight? Perhaps what we call reality is simply one frequency among countless others, yet we've been conditioned to see it as the only one. And yet, even the most perfect cage carries a flaw. The soul inside it remembers. The whisper of Sophia still echoes, reminding us that this world is not the end, but the mask of something higher. If matter is a cage, then it can also become the mirror that reveals the chains. For once the prisoner sees the walls, the illusion begins to tremble. And the Demiurge knew this truth, which is why he stationed wardens, the Archons, across the layers of the cosmos, each guarding the gates of awakening with fear, desire, and ignorance. The prison of the soul, no matter how vast, requires guards. In Gnostic cosmology explained, these guards are the Archons, cosmic wardens stationed at the gates of reality. Each Archon governs a layer of deception, shaping human thought through fear, desire, and ignorance. Think of them as jail keepers who ensure that no soul escapes the labyrinth built by the Demiurge explained. They are not gods themselves, but servants of YALDABAOTH, false god, enforcing his counterfeit order. To the ancients, the Archons were the hidden rulers behind the visible rulers of earth, whispering laws into the ears of kings and priests. Imagine climbing a staircase toward freedom, only to find a sentinel blocking every step. That is how the Archons function. One may whisper fear. If you rebel, you'll lose everything. Another instills desire. Stay here, indulge, and forget the higher path. Yet another clouds the mind with ignorance. There is no beyond. This world is all there is. These voices are not abstract. They echo in the patterns of society, in education, in media, and in the very way we are trained to think. Archons and the Demiurge weave these scripts so deeply that most never realize they are living out someone else's plan. Take fear, for instance. Think of how often decisions are made not out of freedom, but out of anxiety. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of punishment. This fear becomes a leash, pulling humanity back into the false creation myth. The Archon of fear thrives in every law that threatens punishment, every culture that glorifies shame. Desire operates differently. It seduces. The constant craving for wealth, beauty, or recognition becomes a treadmill, always moving but never arriving. And ignorance. It blinds the eyes so completely that even when the cage rattles, people dismiss it as imagination. Isn't it uncanny how these forces govern human life even now? The Gnostics described the Archons as rulers of planetary spheres, each guarding a gate of ascent. To pass through, the soul had to overcome their influence, stripping away illusions layer by layer. Picture a video game where each level is guarded by a boss. You can't advance without facing them. That's how the Gnostics understood liberation. The journey of the soul was not passive. It demanded courage, clarity, and wisdom. And each archon was a challenge to overcome, a test revealing whether the spark of light within could withstand the weight of deception pressed upon it. These myths carry a modern resonance. Have you ever noticed how people struggle against invisible ceilings in their lives? A talented artist paralyzed by self-doubt, a visionary entrepreneur crushed by social pressure, a seeker dismissed as foolish. These are not random obstacles. They are echoes of the Archon's work. YALDABAOTH Gnostic myth says the Archons act as wardens, keeping humanity bound to cycles of struggle. In practical terms, they are every structure that says, stay small, don't question, don't rise. Recognizing these patterns is the first act of rebellion, the first crack in the prison of the soul. And yet, the Archons are not invincible. Their power depends on belief. If humanity collectively ceased to fear, ceased to crave endlessly, ceased to blind itself with ignorance, the Archons would starve. Gnostic forbidden knowledge hints that this is their greatest weakness. They cannot create light, they can only consume it. It's like parasites feeding off energy that does not belong to them. Once the host realizes its strength, the parasite loses its hold. Isn't that an empowering thought? That the very beings who appear as wardens are, in truth, powerless without our cooperation. Still, the Demiurge knew how fragile his system was, which is why he cloaked himself in the mask of divinity. To maintain order, he had to appear not merely as a ruler, but as the Lord of creation itself, and so began the greatest deception of all when the false god enthroned himself as the sole object of worship. The Archons could guard the gates, but only the mask of religion could keep the entire cosmos in obedience. Which leads us straight into the next enigma, the inversion of religion, where the counterfeit architect became the Lord in the eyes of humanity. One of the most unsettling claims in Gnostic cosmology explained is that the Demiurge didn't just build a false reality. He convinced humanity to worship him as the true creator. This is the great inversion of religion. YALDABAOTH, false god, disguised his blindness as omniscience, his arrogance as holiness, his hunger as justice. And because fear, desire, and ignorance were already woven into the prison of the soul, people accepted his throne without question. Imagine a thief stealing not just your house, but your very name, then convincing your children he was their true father. That's the scope of this deception. Think of how major religions often emphasize obedience, law, and sacrifice over inner awakening. The Gnostics saw this as the hand of the false reality creators. The Demiurge, explained through YALDABAOTH Gnostic myth, is not a liberator, but a tyrant, demanding worship as payment for existence. His commandments are strict, his punishments eternal, and his rewards always postponed to the afterlife. Doesn't that structure sound familiar? Entire civilizations have lived under the shadow of this system, mistaking bondage for salvation. The irony is tragic. The very rituals meant to free the soul often tighten its chains. Blood sacrifice is perhaps the clearest sign of this inversion. Throughout history, from the altars of ancient Mesopotamia to the temples of Mesoamerica, gods demanded the spilling of blood. What kind of true source would require suffering as worship? YALDABAOTH, false god, however, thrived on it, feeding his dominion with fear and pain. Even today, sacrifices may look different. Wars fought in the name of God, laws enforced in the name of righteousness, or guilt hammered into the hearts of believers. The Archons and the Demiurge ensured that every drop of devotion reinforced the prison of the soul. The Gnostics didn't reject spirituality, they rejected counterfeit spirituality. They believed the true source was ineffable, unreachable by law or sacrifice, and certainly never bound by wrath. But in the hands of YALDABAOTH Gnostic myth, religion became a system of control, a false creation myth institutionalized into temples, scriptures, and priesthoods. It's like a counterfeit painting hung in a gallery, beautiful at first glance, but designed to hide the truth. And just as counterfeit art enriches the forger, counterfeit religion enriches the false god. Humanity pays with devotion, while the architect of illusion strengthens his throne. Now, imagine a person sincerely praying, pouring out their heart, but directing that energy toward a mask. The sincerity is real, but the destination is false. Isn't that a chilling thought? That the most intimate cries of the soul could be intercepted by the Demiurge, explained and used as fuel for the very system that imprisons us. This is why Gnostic forbidden knowledge was so dangerous. It dared to say, "Your devotion is misdirected. The Lord you serve is not the source you seek." To challenge this was heresy, punishable by death because it threatened the power of the entire illusion. This inversion also explains the deep dissonance many feel in religion. People sense a divine spark within, yet are told they are fallen, unworthy, and guilty. They are encouraged to fear judgment rather than seek inner awakening. Have you ever wondered why guilt is such a powerful force in faith systems? Because guilt feeds the archons. The prison of the soul is not maintained with chains of iron, but with chains of shame and obedience. And the more guilt people carry, the easier it becomes to control them. Isn't it ironic that something meant to free humanity often keeps it bound? But even this great deception carries a fatal flaw. For no matter how powerful the false god's throne appears, the spark of the true source still burns within every human. And that spark cannot be extinguished. The Gnostics whispered of rebellion, of hidden light that laughs at the counterfeit throne. They taught that one doesn't need to kneel before the Demiurge, explained to find freedom. Freedom already lives within. And that whisper of rebellion sets the stage for the next great chapter. The moment when humanity dares to remember, to revolt, and to reclaim the divine spark buried under layers of illusion. The most dangerous idea to the Demiurge explained was not an army, nor a weapon, but a whisper that told humanity, "You are more than this prison." Gnostic rebellion began not with swords, but with hidden teachings, fragile manuscripts, and quiet conversations. They declared that YALDABAOTH, false god, was not the ultimate creator, but a usurper. To hear such words in a time dominated by obedience was like striking a match in a dark cave. That whisper of the hidden light reminded souls that within them burned a fragment of the pleroma, untouched and unbreakable. Imagine being told your entire life that you are powerless, only to discover that the very source of existence lives within you. That revelation is both liberating and terrifying. The archons and the Demiurge relied on humanity's ignorance, but Gnostic forbidden knowledge shattered that spell. They taught that even though matter feels like a cage, the divine spark inside cannot be imprisoned. It is like finding a candle hidden in your chest, a flame that refuses to die no matter how much darkness surrounds it. Isn't that an empowering image? That the soul carries the key to its own freedom. The Gnostics expressed this rebellion in daily practice. They valued direct experience over blind belief. Instead of bowing to temples built for YALDABAOTH Gnostic myth, they sought inner visions, meditation, and mystical insight. Some fasted, others prayed, but not to the false god. Instead, they turned inward, seeking the silence where the hidden light could speak. Today, one might find echoes of this rebellion in mindfulness, in questioning authority, in searching for truth beyond dogma. The tools may change, but the spirit remains the same. To awaken from the false reality creators dream. And yet, rebellion carried great risk. To speak openly against the Demiurge, explained, was to invite persecution. Many Gnostics were silenced, their texts burned, their communities scattered. But the whisper never fully died. Like seeds carried by the wind, their teachings survived in fragments, waiting for ears willing to listen. Isn't it fascinating how ideas, once planted, outlived the empires that tried to erase them? The Gnostic spark is proof that no prison of the soul is perfect. Some cracks always remain, and through them, light seeps in. At its heart, Gnostic rebellion was less about fighting an enemy and more about remembering who we truly are. They believed that each human being is a traveler trapped in a counterfeit cosmos, but carrying within them a map back to the source. That map was the spark itself, guiding the soul through the labyrinth of archons. Imagine walking through a vast forest at night with only a small lantern. The darkness may stretch endlessly, but the lantern is enough to keep moving forward. That is how the hidden light operates, quiet, humble, but unstoppable. This rebellion also reframed suffering. Instead of seeing pain as punishment from God, Gnostics saw it as evidence of the false reality creators at work. Every tear, every injustice, every cycle of war and hunger became proof that the Demiurge explained had twisted creation. But suffering could also awaken longing, the deep yearning to return home. Isn't it true that sometimes it's pain, not comfort, that pushes us to seek higher truths? For the Gnostics, even despair became a doorway, reminding the soul it was never meant to stay in the prison. But rebellion was only the beginning. If humanity carried the spark, if every soul was truly a fragment of the pleroma, then the battle was not just against the archons, it was against the cycle itself, the endless recycling of souls through death and rebirth. The Gnostics warned that unless one awakened, the Demiurge and his wardens would keep the spark bound forever. And so the question became, what are the spiritual consequences of living in this illusion, and what truly happens to the soul when it fails to awaken? If the Demiurge explained forged matter as a cage, then what becomes of the souls trapped within it? Gnostic cosmology explained paints a grim picture. Reincarnation is not a gift of growth, but a recycling system designed to keep humanity asleep. The prison of the soul operates like a wheel, birth, suffering, death, rebirth, spinning endlessly under the watch of archons and the Demiurge. To most, this cycle feels natural, even spiritual, but to the Gnostics it was the greatest deception of all. For if the soul never leaves, it continues to fuel the very machine that feeds on its energy. Think of it like a battery. Every lifetime becomes a charge. Every sorrow a current. Every prayer to the wrong god, another spark for YALDABAOTH, false god. The archons ensure that the charge never runs out by feeding the soul experiences of both joy and pain, reward and punishment, so it never questions the system. Isn't it strange how people often say, life is suffering, as though it were inevitable? That resignation itself is the false creation myth at work, convincing humanity that the prison is the natural order of things. But in truth, it's a cleverly disguised trap. The consequences ripple into human history. Wars, diseases, economic collapses, all these cycles not only destroy bodies, but also reinforce despair and hopelessness. Gnostic forbidden knowledge claims these events are not accidents, but mechanisms within the false reality creator's design. Every trauma on Earth echoes into the astral, keeping souls bound in fear and submission. Even the pursuit of material success becomes a distraction, tethering the soul tighter to the cage of matter. Isn't it uncanny that the very things humanity chases, power, wealth, recognition, become the heaviest chains in this prison? And yet, the consequences are not only collective, but deeply personal. Every individual who remains unaware of their inner spark risks losing lifetimes in the maze. It's like a dreamer who never realizes they are dreaming. doomed to wander in circles without waking up. The Demiurge explained thrives on this ignorance, ensuring that people live and die without ever questioning the system. When was the last time you paused to ask, "Why am I here?" That simple question begins to loosen the grip of the archons. But without it, the soul remains bound by illusion, generation after generation. Religions, too, amplify these consequences. By promising salvation through obedience to YALDABAOTH Gnostic myth, they keep people focused on external rituals while ignoring the inner spark. Imagine someone searching for water while standing next to a hidden well inside their own house. That's how the soul suffers, parched, desperate, and convinced that freedom lies outside when it was within all along. The archons manipulate this ignorance, keeping the well hidden, making sure humanity looks outward rather than inward. And so the prison of the soul remains invisible, even as it surrounds us every day. There's also the haunting idea of suffering as fuel. What if every tear you've cried, every heartbreak you've endured, was consumed as energy by the false reality creators? This isn't meant to make you despair, it's meant to explain why the cycle persists. Archons and the Demiurge feed on low vibrations, on the energy of pain and fear. This is why awakening matters so deeply. To rise above the cycle is to starve the wardens, to deny them the nourishment they require. Doesn't that shift the way you see your struggles? Suddenly, every act of resilience becomes an act of rebellion. But perhaps the most profound consequence of all is that humanity forgets its origin. Souls forget the pleroma, the true source, and begin to believe that YALDABAOTH, false god, is all there is. This amnesia is the greatest tragedy, for a prisoner who forgets freedom no longer seeks escape. Yet within this forgetting lies the faintest hope. If one soul remembers, if one spark awakens, it can ignite others. And beyond the Demiurge's prison, there are still entities of light, the Aeons, waiting to remind us of the truth, which leads us to the next mystery. The beings beyond the Demiurge, the guardians of reality, untouched by illusion. While the Demiurge explained, forged his counterfeit cosmos, there always remained a higher order untouched by his deception. Gnostic cosmology explained introduces the Aeons, emanations of the true source, pure streams of divine intelligence radiating from the pleroma. Unlike YALDABAOTH, false god, these Aeons are not arrogant rulers, but luminous principles of harmony, truth, and love. They represent what creation was meant to be before the fall of Sophia fractured the balance. To remember the Aeons is to remember that not all is prison, not all is illusion. There are still doorways to the real. Think of sunlight streaming through a window. Even if the room is dark, those beams remind you the sun still shines outside. The Aeons are like those beams. They pierce the false reality creator's cage, whispering to the spark within that it belongs to something greater. Where archons bind through fear and ignorance, the Aeons liberate through remembrance and wisdom. Doesn't it give you hope to know that while the false creation myth enslaves, there is still an eternal current pulling the soul back toward freedom? The very existence of this current proves that illusion can never fully erase truth. Sophia herself is one of the Aeons, and though her fall birthed YALDABAOTH Gnostic myth, her essence remains tied to the source. She embodies both tragedy and redemption, a reminder that even error can become a path back to light. The Gnostics believed that Sophia wove seeds of the Aeon's radiance into human souls, planting resistance against the prison of the soul. Every intuition, every sudden insight, every deep longing for meaning is a message from these higher realms. Have you ever felt an inexplicable pull toward truth, even when everything around you discouraged it? That is the Aeons calling. Unlike YALDABAOTH, false god, the Aeons do not demand worship. They do not roar like lions or coil like serpents. Instead, they invite the soul to awaken, to see beyond appearances, to recognize its own divine spark as kin to theirs. This is why Gnostic forbidden knowledge was so feared. It bypassed temples, priests, and sacrifices, leading souls directly to the Aeon's light. Imagine a system built on obedience being shattered by a whisper. You need no mediator. You are already part of the source. That whisper is the true rebellion, and it terrifies the false reality creators. But the relationship between Aeons and humanity is not passive. Just as a seed must be watered to grow, the spark must be nurtured through awareness and practice. The Gnostics taught practices of inner vision, meditation, and sacred knowledge to align with the Aeons. Today, this might look like questioning the illusions of society, seeking truth within, or even creating art that reveals hidden beauty. Every act that breaks the spell of ignorance is a dialogue with the Aeons. Isn't it powerful to think that the smallest choice to seek truth ripples into the higher realms? The ultimate war, then, is not good versus evil in the traditional sense. It is illusion versus truth. The Demiurge explained can roar, enslave, and deceive, but he can never create light. The Aeons, however, flow endlessly from the true source, uncorrupted and eternal. This is why the Gnostics called the source ineffable, beyond names, beyond form, beyond the reach of YALDABAOTH. To touch this truth is to realize that no mask, no prison, no archon can erase the essence of who you are. Doesn't it shift your perspective to see yourself not as a pawn, but as kin to the Aeons? And so, the question remains, if the Aeons still shine and the source still calls, why does humanity remain bound? The answer lies in the persistence of the lie itself. The false god may be weaker than the source, but his prison is built on belief, and belief is powerful. To shatter it requires more than whispers. It requires initiation, a breaking of the illusion so profound that the soul never again mistakes shadow for substance. Which brings us to the final step of this journey, the closing initiation, where the lie of reality itself must be shattered. To speak of shattering the lie of reality is to confront the Demiurge, explained at his core. The false reality creators built a cosmos designed to convince humanity that the cage was the kingdom, that obedience was salvation, and that matter was the only truth. But initiation begins with suspicion, the quiet question that refuses to go away. What if this isn't real? Gnostic cosmology, explained, insists that the very act of questioning already weakens the chains. For once the soul doubts the authority of YALDABAOTH, false god, the prison of the soul begins to tremble. Imagine waking from a dream so convincing that you believed it was life itself. At first, you cling to the fragments, faces, voices, emotions, trying to hold on. But then clarity comes. It was only illusion. That is the awakening the Gnostics sought. The false creation myth loses its power when recognized as counterfeit. Isn't it striking how fear disappears when exposed to truth? YALDABAOTH Gnostic myth depends entirely on ignorance. Once the spark of awareness ignites, the lion-serpent's mask no longer terrifies. The lie can only bind those who accept it unquestioned. Initiation, however, is not a single event but a process. It is the peeling away of layers, like removing masks from a face until the true self is revealed. Each layer belongs to an archon, fear, desire, ignorance, and with each removed, the spark shines brighter. This is not merely philosophical but practical. Every time you resist fear, every time you refuse to be enslaved by desire, every time you seek knowledge over blind belief, you enact Gnostic forbidden knowledge. You are not simply studying myths, you are participating in the rebellion against the false reality creators. But initiation is not without cost. To shatter the lie of reality is to stand apart from the world that worships it. Families, societies, and institutions may see awakening as madness, even danger. Isn't it true that truth-tellers in every age are mocked, silenced, or condemned? Yet the Gnostics believed this was the mark of progress. To carry the spark is to carry a burden, but also a gift, the ability to see beyond the prison of the soul and to point the way for others. The lie loses its hold, not just on individuals, but collectively, as sparks ignite sparks. The Gnostics also spoke of a final confrontation, a moment when the soul stands before YALDABAOTH, false god, and refuses his authority. This was not a battle of swords, but of recognition. Imagine a prisoner standing before the warden and simply saying, "You are not my master." In that instant, the entire system collapses for that soul. Doesn't that image stir something within you? The realization that the Demiurge explained is powerful only because of consent. To withdraw that consent is to reclaim sovereignty, to step beyond illusion into the light of the true source. And yet, shattering the lie of reality is not about escaping the world, but transforming how you walk through it. The body remains in matter, but the soul is no longer bound. It is like living inside a dream while knowing it's a dream. You gain freedom to act with clarity, compassion, and courage. The archons may whisper, but their voices lose their grip. Fear becomes opportunity. Desire becomes choice. Ignorance becomes curiosity. Isn't it liberating to imagine a life lived not under the shadow of YALDABAOTH Gnostic myth, but in the radiance of the aeon's truth? So the initiation closes, but not with an ending, with a question. If YALDABAOTH rules the world of matter, then what part of you does not belong to him? And what happens when you awaken to the light beyond the prison? The Gnostics left no easy answers, only a challenge. To dare to see, to dare to question, to dare to remember. The lie of reality trembles when even one spark awakens, and perhaps, just perhaps, the moment you finish hearing these words, the whisper of your own hidden light will grow louder than the roar of the false god. So now the question is no longer about myths in old manuscripts, it's about you. If the Demiurge explained built this prison of the soul, and if YALDABAOTH, false god, still rules through fear and ignorance, then what are you going to do with this knowledge? Will you go back to sleep, pretending the cage is a palace, or will you begin to listen to that hidden spark within you, the whisper of the true source calling you beyond the illusion? Every act of awareness weakens the archons. Every moment you question, every time you choose truth over fear, you crack the mask of the false reality creators. But awareness without action fades. So how will you apply this? Will you start meditating, journaling, questioning the systems around you, seeking wisdom in Gnostic forbidden knowledge instead of blind obedience? Or will you remain another name in the endless cycle of souls bound by illusion? Remember, your freedom doesn't begin after death. It begins the moment you refuse to kneel before a lie. The Gnostics knew that awakening was not about escape, but about recognition. You are not powerless. You are not a pawn. You are kin to the aeons, carrying a fragment of eternity. Doesn't that change everything about how you see yourself? Now, let me ask you directly. Do you feel that this world is truly real? Or have you always sensed it was a shadow? What if the prison was never locked, and the only barrier is the belief that you are trapped? Isn't it time to test those walls for yourself? If these ideas stirred something inside you, don't let the spark die. Subscribe to this channel, activate the notifications, and stay with me on this path of unveiling, because the story of the Demiurge and YALDABAOTH is not just history, it's the blueprint of your present life. And together we will continue to tear apart the veil of illusion, step by step, until the hidden light shines fully again.